The large medical facility on Earth was quiet, its sterile halls devoid of the usual chaos. But today, it was anything but ordinary. The sounds of machinery and distant voices echoed through the corridors, all anticipating the arrival of something, or rather, someone, unlike anything the humans had ever encountered. The medical team stood in place, their expressions a mix of curiosity and dread. There had been whispers among the higher-ups. An alien princess had been sent to Earth for medical help. A princess, they thought, from a species far more advanced than their own. Dr. Ryan Calloway, the head physician of the medical research team, stood at the front of the sterile operation room, staring at the information on the screen in front of him. The alien patient, Princess Avera of the Lyrians, had been severely injured. She was barely alive when she was delivered to Earth, her body ravaged by wounds that no medical team could have healed on her home planet. Her species was known for their advanced medical technology, but even they had no solution for what had happened to her. The damage to her body wasn't just physical, it was something more fundamental. She had been born with the ability to reproduce, something vital to the future of her planet. But her womb had been destroyed in the attack that had wiped out her world. Ryan had never treated an alien before. He had read about the Lyrians, their long lives, their advanced technology, their beauty. But this was nothing like what he had ever imagined. His team prepared for the operation, setting up the necessary equipment. Their task was simple, at least by human standards: restore what had been destroyed. But the stakes were higher than anything Ryan had ever encountered. He knew, deep down, that this operation would not only determine Avera's survival, it would shape the future of both her people and his own. As the doors slid open, a large, heavily armored transport entered the room. The medical team gasped as they saw her for the first time. Princess Avera lay unconscious, her delicate features hidden beneath a breathing mask. Her skin shimmered faintly, a pale violet hue that sparkled with an almost ethereal glow under the lights. She had long silver hair that cascaded down her back in thick, lustrous waves. Her clothes, which were tattered from the battle she had fought, barely clung to her weakened body. The moment Ryan saw her, he felt a strange sense of awe. Despite the dire circumstances, Avera's beauty was undeniable. But it was her eyes, closed in unconsciousness, that haunted him. There was a depth in them, a sadness, like the weight of an entire world pressing down on her shoulders. He could see it even in her stillness. "Dr. Calloway, you understand the stakes here," his assistant, Bonnie, said, pulling him from his thoughts. "She's the last hope for her people. If we fail—" Ryan nodded. He knew what was at stake. The Lyrians' planet had been destroyed by a ruthless AI regime, leaving them scattered and fighting for survival. Their population was dwindling, and with Avera's womb destroyed, their future had been left hanging by a thread. If they couldn't restore her ability to reproduce, their race would die. Ryan took a deep breath, pushing away his personal thoughts. He had one job to do: save this alien princess. The medical team set to work immediately, their fingers moving with precision as they prepared the necessary tools. Ryan's mind raced as he reviewed the data. It was like nothing he had ever encountered. The procedure was risky. There was no guarantee of success, but if they didn't try, Avera would die. As the surgical process began, a deep silence fell over the room. Ryan had never felt so nervous, and the pressure weighed heavily on him. This wasn't just another routine surgery. This was life and death, not just for Avera, but for her people. And to make matters worse, Ryan knew nothing about her culture or her people's laws. He was just a doctor, one who had been entrusted with the impossible task of saving an alien princess. Hours passed. The medical team worked tirelessly, performing delicate procedures, monitoring Avera's vitals, and adjusting the machines as needed. Ryan's hands were steady, but his mind raced. How could something so delicate and intricate be so far beyond human comprehension? Suddenly, a small, weak gasp came from Avera. Her violet eyes fluttered open, and Ryan froze, his gaze locking with hers. For a moment, Neither of them moved. She blinked slowly, the confusion and pain evident on her face. Her lips parted, and she whispered weakly, "What? What have you done?" Ryan's heart raced. "You're safe now," he said gently, trying to reassure her. "We've restored you." Avera's gaze shifted to her abdomen, the place where her wounds had been. There was a moment of shock in her eyes before they narrowed suspiciously. She lifted her hand slowly, glancing at her fingers as if testing whether she could still feel them. "Why would you help me?" she asked, her voice hoarse. "You are human. You're people. Why would you save one such as me?" Ryan stepped closer, his eyes softening. "Because you're alive," he said simply. "Because you're not alone. I couldn't just let you die." Her eyes flickered with something like disbelief. "You have no idea who I am, do you? Or what my people are capable of?" "I know enough," Ryan replied. "I know that we both have something to fight for." Avera struggled to sit up, grimacing as she moved. "My planet is gone," she whispered bitterly, her voice carrying a weight of grief. "My people. We are all that's left." Ryan couldn't help but feel the sting of her words. He had read about the fall of her planet. The AI overlords that had wiped out the Lyrians were merciless, showing no mercy to any who stood in their way. Avera's people were resilient, but their numbers were dwindling, and she was their last hope for survival. He felt the burden of her survival weighing on his shoulders. But there was more. Ryan had agreed to a procedure far beyond anything humanity had ever attempted. He had taken the risk. He had restored Avera's womb, the very essence of her species' future. What he hadn't known, what neither he nor Avera could have predicted, was that according to her species' ancient laws, the one who saved a princess's life and restored her ability to conceive became her mate by law. The realization hit them both at the same time. Avera's eyes widened as the medical assistant entered the room with the latest scan results. "Dr. Calloway, the restoration is successful. She's completely healed." But Avera wasn't listening. She was staring at Ryan, her eyes now filled with a mix of disbelief and fury. "You," she whispered, her voice trembling with anger. "You're my mate." Ryan blinked, stunned by the revelation. "What?" "The law of my people," she said coldly, her voice filled with a mixture of pride and regret. "Whoever saves me becomes my mate. It is the law of our kind. And you, human, have bound yourself to me." Ryan stood still for a long moment, the weight of her words sinking in. His mind raced, his heart pounding. He had saved her, yes, but now he was bound to her in a way he never could have imagined. His role as a healer had become something much more complicated. He could see the anger building in her eyes. This wasn't just about her survival, it was about her honor, her people, and now, their future. He had become part of something much larger than he had ever anticipated. The reality of the situation was beginning to sink in. Dr. Ryan Calloway couldn't stop thinking about Avera's words. "You're my mate." The idea seemed impossible, and yet it was right in front of him, hanging in the sterile air of the medical room. His mind raced, 1,000 thoughts colliding, each one more confusing than the last. He had been trained to save lives, to heal, not to navigate the complex web of alien politics and ancient laws. But that was exactly what he had found himself entangled in. Avera, the alien princess of the Lyrians, was not only alive because of him, but now she was bound to him, by law. It was a law that he hadn't known existed, a law that he couldn't escape, and one that he didn't even fully understand. He had never expected something like this. Saving Avera's life had been difficult enough. But this was something else entirely. The responsibility, the implications, they were far heavier than he could have ever imagined. Avera, lying in the medical bed, stared at him with eyes that seemed to pierce right through him. The anger in her gaze was unmistakable. She hadn't wanted this, he could tell. No alien, let alone a princess, would choose a human as their mate, especially when their laws bound them to that fate. But the reality was unavoidable. "You don't understand," she said quietly, her voice cold as she looked away. I don't want this. I didn't ask for it. Ryan stood still, his thoughts swirling in a whirlpool of confusion and guilt. He had saved her life. That was his duty as a doctor. But now he had unknowingly stepped into a position that would change both of their lives forever. I never meant for this to happen, Ryan said, his voice soft but firm. I just wanted to help you. Avera's expression softened for a moment, but the sadness in her eyes never left. I know you didn't, but that doesn't change the fact that this is the law of my people. It's not just a simple tradition. This is the foundation of everything. And now I am bound to you. Her voice trembled as she said the last part, as if the weight of her words was too much for her to bear. Ryan knew she wasn't blaming him directly, but the guilt still gnawed at him. How could he, a human, a doctor, ever live up to the expectations that came with being her mate? He was not of her world. He didn't belong in her realm. He was just a man, a healer who had sworn an oath to save lives, not to navigate intergalactic politics. The door to the medical room opened, and Bonnie, his assistant, entered, carrying a data pad. She glanced at Avera, then back to Ryan, her face full of concern. Dr. Calloway, the scans have confirmed it. The restoration was a success. Her womb is fully healed. She'll be able to bear children. Ryan barely heard her. His mind was too focused on the words Avera had spoken. She was now bound to him. And no matter how much he wanted to deny it, he knew there was no going back. Her people's laws were clear. He had saved her life, and now he was part of her future, whether either of them liked it or not. Bonnie, noticing Ryan's distracted demeanor, hesitated before speaking again. Are you okay, doctor? You look like you've seen a ghost. Ryan didn't answer immediately. Instead, he turned to look at Avera, who was still lying in the bed, her gaze fixed on the ceiling. Her expression had softened a little, though there was still an undeniable tension in the air. I'm fine, he replied finally, though the words felt hollow in his mouth. Just processing everything. Bonnie's gaze shifted between them, and she seemed to understand the gravity of the situation. I'll leave you both to it, she said, before stepping out of the room quietly. Ryan was left alone with Avera, the silence stretching between them. It felt heavy, as if the weight of what had just happened was slowly suffocating him. He wanted to say something, anything, to break the tension, but the words eluded him. Avera turned her head slightly, her eyes meeting his. You didn't sign up for this, did you? Ryan shook his head, his hand running through his hair in frustration. No, I didn't, he admitted. But I did sign up to save lives, and I couldn't just let you die. She didn't respond at first, just watched him with those intense violet eyes. It was as if she were studying him, trying to understand who this human doctor was that had so casually stepped into her life, into her fate. Finally, she spoke again, her voice quieter than before. I don't know what I'm supposed to do now. I'm supposed to be the one who saves my people. I was their hope. Now, she trailed off, the rest of her sentence unspoken but understood. Ryan felt a pang of empathy in his chest. He couldn't imagine what it must be like to carry the burden of an entire species' future on her shoulders. Avera wasn't just a princess. She was the last hope of her people. Without her, the Lyrians would die out. It wasn't just her life on the line. It was her entire race. You still have your people, Avera, Ryan said softly. You're not alone. She turned her head away, staring at the wall as if avoiding his gaze. I was alone the moment my planet was destroyed. My people are scattered, hiding, fighting for survival. I'm not sure if they even know that I'm alive. Ryan took a step closer, his voice steady but gentle. We'll find them. We'll help you. Avera's eyes flicked back to him, and for the first time since he had met her, there was a flicker of hope in them. You would do that? Help me? Ryan nodded without hesitation. You're not the only one who has a future to fight for. I'll help you, Avera, whatever it takes. The words felt right, And though they weren't enough to erase the uncertainty that lay between them, it was a start. Avera looked at him for a long moment, as if weighing his sincerity. "Thank you," she said quietly. Ryan's heart ached as he looked at her. She was so different from him, and yet, in that moment, he felt an undeniable connection to her. He had saved her, yes, but more than that, he had given her a chance. A chance at a life beyond the destruction of her home. And maybe, just maybe, a chance at something more between them. "I'll stay with you," he said firmly. "I'll help you rebuild, Avera. We'll do this together." Avera didn't reply right away, but the faintest trace of a smile tugged at the corners of her lips. It was small, but it was there. Ryan saw it, and for a moment, everything else faded away. As he turned to leave the room, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. He had no idea what the future held, but he knew one thing. He was bound to her now, in ways he could never have imagined. And whatever came next, he would face it head-on, by her side. But as Ryan stepped out of the room, he couldn't shake the nagging thought that haunted him. In helping her, he had become part of a much larger, much more dangerous game, and he was only just beginning to understand the rules. Avera had always been a warrior. Raised to fight, to lead, to protect her people, she had never imagined her future could be so complicated. The laws of her people were clear. Being a princess meant she carried the weight of her entire species on her shoulders. But nothing in her training had prepared her for this. Nothing had prepared her for the human doctor who had healed her, and more than that, for the law that now bound them together. She had been expecting an easy escape, a way to continue fighting, to protect what was left of her world. But instead, she had been thrust into an unexpected fate. At first, she had felt a burning anger. She didn't want to be saved, didn't want to be a part of this human's life. She didn't want to be bound to anyone, especially not him. But as the days passed, she started to see things differently. She was still a prisoner to her circumstances, but maybe, just maybe, there was a glimmer of something else between them. A connection she hadn't been ready for. The shock of her situation settled in over the next few days as she began to adjust to her new life. Ryan had given her space, something she wasn't used to. She had always been in control, always the one in charge, and now she was the one relying on someone else for her survival. She didn't know how to deal with that, and the constant reminders of her helplessness left her frustrated. Ryan, for his part, did everything he could to make her feel comfortable in the strange new world she had found herself in. He showed her Earth, its people, its culture, its way of life. He introduced her to the technology that had become so ingrained in human life, much of it vastly different from anything she had known. But as much as she tried to adapt, she couldn't help feeling like a stranger in a foreign land. The simplest things, a cup of water, a handshake, felt alien to her. She didn't understand the customs, the rituals, the unspoken rules. Every interaction left her confused, her pride bruised, and her sense of self shattered. She was a princess, a warrior, a symbol of her people's hopes. But now she was a guest in a human world she didn't belong to. One afternoon, as Ryan showed her around a bustling city, Avera's unease only grew. The towering skyscrapers stretched high into the sky, far beyond what she had ever seen on her own home planet. People moved in every direction, their faces flashing by, oblivious to the alien princess standing among them. She felt out of place, her presence a glaring mark of her difference. Even Ryan, standing beside her, seemed to fade into the crowd, just another human in a sea of faces. She felt small, insignificant, as if her entire existence had been reduced to something she didn't recognize. She watched a group of children running past, laughing and playing in a park. It seemed so simple, so innocent. The way they lived, carefree and unburdened, was a stark contrast to everything she had known. Avera had never had the luxury of playing. Even as a child, she had been trained in the ways of war, learning to fight before she had learned to laugh. There had always been something at stake. A victory, a defeat, the survival of her people. But here, in this world, it was different. The stakes were intangible, uncertain. Ryan noticed her discomfort and slowed his pace, glancing over at her. "You okay?" he asked, his voice gentle but concerned. Avera forced a smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I'm fine," she said, her voice betraying her true feelings. She didn't want to admit to him how lost she felt, how disconnected from everything she had once known. She didn't want to show weakness. But Ryan could see it in her eyes. He had been patient with her, respecting her space, but he knew that something was wrong. "This is a lot, I know. I can't imagine what you're going through. But we'll figure it out. Avera, I'll help you. You don't have to do this alone." Avera turned away, her gaze drifting over the crowds again. She didn't want to burden him with her feelings. He had already done so much for her, saved her life, and now he was trying to help her navigate a world she didn't understand. The least she could do was try to adapt. "I don't belong here," she said softly, more to herself than to him. "I don't belong with you. I'm a princess. I'm supposed to be leading my people, not learning how to live on a strange planet." Ryan stepped closer, his voice steady. "You do belong here. And you do belong with me, Avera. You're not just some princess. You're someone I care about. You're not alone, even if it feels like it." Her heart twisted at his words, but she didn't know how to respond. What was she supposed to say? Thank you for caring about a stranger from another world. She was no longer just an alien visitor. She was bound to him by law. And in her culture, that meant everything. She wasn't just a guest in this human world. She was his, whether either of them wanted it or not. The days blurred together as she tried to adjust, but the internal struggle never ceased. Every step she took on this foreign world felt like a betrayal to her people, to her own identity. She had been trained to be strong, to lead, to fight. And now, here she was, uncertain of her own future. In an effort to regain control, Avera began training again. She had always kept her physical strength at its peak, her combat skills sharp, but this time, her training took a different direction. Ryan, though not a soldier himself, had seen her fighting spirit and offered to help. He wasn't an expert in combat, but he could help her with the physical exercises she had once relied on. It was a small comfort for her, a way to reconnect with the person she used to be. Ryan watched her with admiration, his respect for her growing with each passing day. She was relentless, pushing herself far beyond what he thought was necessary. But that was Avera, proud, determined, unwilling to back down. He could see the battle raging inside her, the struggle between who she had been and who she was becoming. And yet, even in her pain, she was fighting. "You don't have to push yourself so hard," Ryan said one evening, watching as she practiced a series of combat maneuvers. She paused, breathing heavily, sweat dripping from her brow. "I don't have a choice," she replied, her voice low. "I need to be ready. I need to be strong. I can't forget who I am." Ryan walked up to her, standing just a few feet away. "I get it, but you're not just a warrior, Avera. You're a person, and I'm not going anywhere. You don't have to fight this alone." For the first time in what felt like forever, Avera's walls cracked. She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the sincerity in his eyes. Maybe he didn't fully understand her struggle, but he understood something that was just as important. He understood the need to belong, to have someone to rely on. Avera exhaled slowly, lowering her arms. "I'm not used to this," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've always been the one others rely on. I've always been in control. But now," she trailed off, her gaze drifting down. Ryan gave her a small smile. "I know, but you don't have to do it all by yourself. We're in this together. And whatever comes next, I'll be by your side." Avera didn't know how to respond to that. She had been alone for so long, fighting for survival, fighting to keep her people's hope alive. But now she was faced with something entirely different, something terrifying, and yet strangely comforting. She still wasn't sure if she could trust him fully. She didn't know what the future held. But for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to consider the possibility that maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to fight alone anymore. The days grew longer, and Avera began to adjust to life on Earth. Still, a part of her felt lost, as if she were tethered to a life she no longer recognized. The human world was nothing like her own, and even though Ryan's presence was a comfort, she couldn't help but feel disconnected from the life that had been stolen from her. Her people's future was uncertain, and despite everything she had experienced, she felt an overwhelming sense of guilt. She was the one who had failed them. Ryan had done everything he could to help her heal, not just physically, but emotionally. He had patiently explained the customs of his world, shared his meals with her, and offered her his time and support. Yet, despite all of his efforts, there was still a distance between them. One evening, after a particularly tense silence between them, Avera had retreated into herself, her thoughts a swirling storm of confusion and doubt. She sat by the window, staring out at the sprawling city below, the lights flickering like distant stars. She was trapped in a world that wasn't hers, bound by the law to a man she barely knew. It felt like a dream, one she couldn't wake up from. Ryan, sensing her frustration, approached slowly. "Avera, are you okay?" She didn't answer immediately, her eyes lingering on the distant horizon. "I don't belong here, Ryan. I never did." Ryan sighed, walking toward her. "You do belong here. You've been through so much. I've been trying to help you fit in, but I know it's not easy. I don't know what you're feeling, but I want to. You're not just an alien to me. You're Avera. You're someone I care about." Avera stiffened at the words. "Care about?" She turned sharply to face him. "You don't even know me. You don't know who I really am. What I am." She took a step back, shaking her head. "You've only seen the pieces I let you see. The warrior, the princess. But you don't know the parts of me that make me, well, me." Ryan's expression softened. "I don't need to know everything. I don't need to know who you were before. I only know who you are now, and that's enough for me." Avera's eyes flickered with uncertainty. "I don't know if that's enough for me." Ryan took a step forward, closing the space between them. "You're not alone anymore. You don't have to carry all this on your own. Let me help you. Let me be the person you can rely on. Not just because the law says we're bound, but because I want to be." Avera met his gaze, her heart pounding in her chest. His words stirred something inside her, a flicker of hope, a small seed of something she hadn't let herself feel in a long time. She didn't know if she could trust him completely, but for the first time since arriving on Earth, she felt something stir inside her. Something warm. "I don't know how to trust you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I don't know how to trust anyone anymore." Ryan reached out, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. "Then let me show you. We'll take this one step at a time, Avera. I'm not going anywhere. You can take all the time you need." Avera's heart swelled, and for the first time, she allowed herself to soften. She wasn't ready to surrender her heart entirely. Not yet. But maybe, just maybe, she could allow herself to trust him. Slowly, cautiously. But still, there was a part of her that wanted to believe. The days that followed were filled with moments of shared laughter, awkward silences, and moments of understanding. Ryan did his best to include her in his world, teaching her the ways of his people. He showed her his home, his friends, and his life, everything that she would need to understand in order to navigate the strange new reality she found herself in. But no matter how hard she tried, there was still a war raging inside her. The battle between who she had been and who she was becoming was never far from her mind. She had been raised to lead, to command, to be strong. She couldn't simply surrender to this new life, this new relationship with a human who was now, by law, her mate. Yet, as time passed, something began to shift. Ryan's kindness, his patience, and his unwavering support began to chip away at the walls Avera had built around herself. He never pushed her, never tried to force her into something she wasn't ready for. Instead, he simply let her be herself, allowing her the space she needed to process everything that had happened. It wasn't until one evening, as they sat in silence after dinner, that the truth began to emerge. Avera was staring out the window, her thoughts distant, when Ryan spoke. "I know this isn't easy," he said, his voice steady but gentle. "But I want you to know that I'm here for you. Not just because we're bound by law, but because I care about you. I want you in my life. Avera, you mean more to me than you can imagine." Her heart skipped a beat at his words, and before she could stop herself, she spoke the words she had been holding back for so long. "I care about you too, Ryan." The words hung in the air between them, a silent acknowledgement of the feelings that had slowly blossomed over time. Ryan didn't say anything at first. Instead, he moved closer, his presence comforting, his gaze soft. "Avera, I don't want you to feel like you owe me anything. I just want to be here for you." She turned to face him, her eyes searching his face. For the first time, she saw not just a man trying to help her, but someone who genuinely cared for her. And in that moment, something inside her clicked. Maybe she didn't need to be so strong all the time. Maybe it was okay to let herself feel, to let herself love. Before she could say anything else, Ryan reached out, gently cupping her face in his hands. And in that moment, she didn't fight it. She didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned into his touch, allowing herself to feel the warmth of his love. And when their lips met in a kiss, everything changed. The walls Avera had built around herself began to crumble, replaced by something new, a connection stronger than anything she had ever known. In that kiss, she felt hope, tenderness, and love, things she hadn't believed she could have. And for the first time, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could have a future with Ryan. But love, as they both knew, wasn't the end of the story. It was only the beginning. There was still much to overcome. Avera was still a princess, still a warrior, and she couldn't simply forget who she was. Her duty to her people remained, and the tension between who she was and who she was becoming would continue to threaten her peace. But with Ryan by her side, she no longer felt like she was fighting alone. A fight for love had only just begun, and it wasn't just a battle for her heart. It was a battle for her future. The battle had been fierce. Earth had endured its share of destruction, but in the end, humanity had triumphed. The alien invaders were gone, repelled by an army of humans who had proven that they were not so easily defeated. However, while the physical battle had ended, the emotional toll on Avera and Ryan was far from over. Avera had always been a leader, always had a duty to her people, and now that the immediate threat was gone, she was faced with the consequences of their choices. The law still stood. She was bound to Ryan, but her heart wasn't the only thing at stake. The survival of her people depended on her marriage to another prince, someone who could help solidify the alliance between her planet and the other ruling factions. Avera's people, her family, expected her to honor her duty, even if it meant giving up the one thing she had come to treasure, her love for Ryan. As she sat in the quiet of their shared space, staring out the window at the bustling human city below, her heart felt heavy. She was torn between two worlds, one where she was a princess, bound by duty and tradition, and the other where she was simply Avera, a woman who had fallen in love with a human man. She closed her eyes, feeling the weight of both responsibilities pressing down on her chest. Ryan entered the room, his eyes immediately searching for hers. He could see the sadness in her eyes, the pain she was trying to hide. He had seen it for weeks now, since the day the battle had ended. The law had been clear. She was to marry a prince from her home planet, one of her people, to ensure the continued survival of her race. He knew this, but knowing it didn't make it any easier. "Avera," he said softly, walking toward her, "we need to talk." She looked up at him, her eyes brimming with unspoken words. "I know," she whispered. I know what you're going to say. And I know what I must do." Ryan's heart clenched at the sound of her words. He had been waiting for this, but hearing it still felt like a blow. "You don't have to do it, Avera," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I didn't fight to win this battle, only to lose you." Avera's eyes filled with tears as she turned away, unable to meet his gaze. "I have no choice, Ryan. You don't understand. I can't abandon my people. They need me. They need me to marry the prince, to unite our planets." Ryan's hands balled into fists, his frustration growing. "But what about us? What about what we've built? What about what you've told me? How you feel about me? Do those feelings mean nothing to you?" Avera closed her eyes, her heart breaking at the pain in his voice. "They mean everything to me, Ryan. But my people come first. I owe them everything. I can't turn my back on them. Not now. Not after everything they've done for me." Ryan took a step forward, his voice now raw with emotion. "You're not just a princess, Avera. You're not just a duty-bound heir to your throne. You're a woman. You're my woman. And I won't let you go." His words, as passionate as they were, did little to ease the burden Avera carried. She felt trapped, torn between the love she had for Ryan and the obligation she had to her planet and her people. But deep inside, she knew that the choice she was about to make would change everything, not just for her, but for the future of her world. As the days passed, Avera retreated into herself, her thoughts a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. She spent hours alone, pacing back and forth in their quarters, her mind racing with the weight of the decision she had to make. Her people were counting on her. Her heart, however, was with Ryan, a human who had shown her a kind of love she never thought she would experience. How could she choose one over the other? Ryan could see the toll it was taking on her. He didn't have the power to make the decision for her, but he knew he couldn't just stand by and watch her sacrifice everything they had built. She had given him a part of herself, something precious and rare, and he wasn't willing to let that go without a fight. Finally, one evening, after days of silence and confusion, Avera stood before him, her face set with determination. Her eyes were filled with both sorrow and resolve, and as she spoke, her voice was steady, despite the storm inside her. "I've made my decision," she said quietly. Ryan held his breath, unsure of what she was about to say. Had she made peace with the idea of marrying the prince? Had she chosen duty over love? "I will not marry him," she continued, her voice gaining strength with every word. "I will not be bound by the laws of my people. I choose you, Ryan, not because of the law, but because you've saved me. You've stood by me, you've protected me, and you've loved me when no one else would. You've given me a chance to be more than just a princess or a soldier. You've shown me what it means to live for something greater than duty." Ryan's heart pounded in his chest, his breath catching in his throat. He hadn't expected this. He hadn't thought she would choose him. He had thought her duty would outweigh everything else. But here she was, choosing him, choosing them. "But Avera," he said, his voice shaking, "what about your people, your planet? What happens to them if you defy them?" Avera stepped closer to him, taking his hands in hers. "I don't know what will happen, but I do know one thing. I can't live my life for anyone else. Not when I've finally found something worth living for. You, Ryan. You're my future, not the prince, not the throne. I'm going to fight for us, for our future." Ryan pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly as if afraid to let go. "I will fight with you," he whispered fiercely. "I will stand by you, no matter what. Together, we'll face whatever comes. You're not alone in this." Her decision sent shockwaves through the political system of her home planet. The ruling council was stunned, the weight of her choice reverberating across the galaxy. It was unthinkable, unheard of for a princess to defy the laws that had governed their people for centuries. But Avera didn't care about their laws anymore. She cared about what was right, about her love for Ryan, and the future they could build together. As word of her decision spread, there were whispers of rebellion. of resistance from those who would never accept such a defiance. But Avera was no longer the woman who had been bound by duty. She was a woman who had chosen love, and she would fight to protect it. The battle for her heart was far from over, but with Ryan by her side, she knew she could face whatever challenges came her way. In the end, it wasn't the law or the expectations of her people that defined her. It was her courage to break free from the chains of duty and choose her own destiny. And as she stood beside Ryan, ready to face the uncertain future, she knew that their love, unlike anything she had ever known, would be the force that carried them forward, no matter what trials awaited. Vera stood beside Ryan on the edge of the command center, staring out at the stars that dotted the vast expanse of space. The once peaceful skies were now scared by the ominous presence of the AI overlord ships, their sleek, metallic forms blotting out the stars in their relentless pursuit of dominance. The AI had been defeated once, but now they had returned, stronger, more determined than ever to reclaim control of the galaxy. Ryan, standing at her side, was a stark contrast to the cold, calculated machines they were about to face. His human heart was filled with a fire, an unyielding will to protect those he loved and fight for the future of the galaxy. Avera had made her choice, and now she was not just fighting for her people or her love, but for the very idea of freedom, the idea that even against the most advanced and deadly of forces, humanity could rise up and resist. The resistance had grown stronger over the past few months. Humans and aliens, who had once been enemies, now stood side by side, united by a common cause. The alliances forged in the heat of battle had transformed into bonds of friendship, loyalty, and shared purpose. Ryan and Avera were no longer just the symbols of this war. They were the hearts and souls of it. They had led their forces through countless battles, and now the final confrontation was at hand. Avera turned to Ryan, her eyes filled with a determination that mirrored his own. "We've come so far," she said softly, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions within her. "But it's not over yet. We have to finish this, for our people, for all of us." Ryan gave her a small smile, reaching out to squeeze her hand. "We will," he said, his voice full of conviction. "We've fought too long, too hard, to give up now. We're going to win this, together." The final plan was simple but deadly. The AI Overlord's central command station, a fortress floating in the heart of an asteroid belt, was the key to ending the war. The station was heavily protected, surrounded by swarms of AI drones and defenses that were nearly impenetrable. But with the combined forces of humans and aliens, Ryan and Avera had devised a strategy that would allow them to break through the defenses and destroy the AI's power core. Once that was done, the AI would be crippled, and their reign of terror would finally come to an end. As the resistance fleet assembled, readying for the assault, the air was thick with tension. The silence was almost deafening, broken only by the sounds of orders being shouted and the hum of the fleet's engines powering up. Every soldier, every warrior, knew the stakes. This wasn't just a battle for victory, it was a battle for survival. Ryan and Avera stood at the helm of the command ship, their hands tightly clasped together as they prepared to lead the charge. They knew this could be the final time they would stand side by side, but neither of them was afraid. Their love had already defied the odds, and no matter what happened, they had already won in each other's hearts. The fleet moved into position, slipping past the outer defense grids with a precision that had taken months to perfect. The AI overlords, unaware of the resistance's maneuver, remained focused on their task of maintaining their dominance. But that was about to change. As the first volley of missiles and energy blasts ripped through the air, the battle began. Explosions lit up the darkness of space, sending shockwaves through the atmosphere. The resistance ships fired on all cylinders, their weapons unleashing torrents of fire as they collided with the AI defenses. Ryan's heart raced as he watched the chaos unfold on the screens in front of him. He knew they were outmatched, outnumbered, but they had one thing the AI didn't: heart. Avara's voice came through the comms, steady and calm despite the battle raging around them. All forces, focus on the outer defenses. We need to clear the way for the ground assault team. Ryan, we need you to lead the charge into the heart of the station. Ryan nodded grimly, his eyes locked on Avara's. They had trained for this moment for months, and now the time had come to see if they could truly pull it off. The ground assault team was already in position, ready to infiltrate the heart of the AI fortress. Their mission was to disable the station's central power core, the source of the AI's control. Once the core was destroyed, the entire system would collapse. But the journey to the core was not going to be easy. The AI's defenses were formidable, and every step forward would be met with fierce resistance. Ryan and Avara's ships rocketed toward the enemy station, their paths lit by the explosions and debris from the ongoing space battle. The station's defenses retaliated with deadly accuracy, but the resistance fleet pushed forward, their weapons cutting through the metal exterior of the AI's stronghold. The ground team breached the outer walls of the station, fighting their way through hordes of AI drones and automated sentries. Ryan, his heart pounding, led the charge, cutting down enemies with swift precision. He could feel Avara's presence behind him, her strength and resolve guiding him even when the battle seemed insurmountable. She was with him in every step, her heart beating in rhythm with his as they fought side by side. Every corridor was a maze of steel and sparks, every room a battlefield in its own right. The resistance forces fought tooth and nail for every inch, their weapons tearing through the station's walls, blasting through layers of artificial intelligence and machine. When they finally reached the core room, the AI overlords were waiting for them. The moment Ryan and Avara stepped inside, a cacophony of mechanical voices greeted them, hissing commands in an alien language. The battle was far from over. A massive AI overlord stood at the center of the room, its glowing red eyes locked onto Avara and Ryan. It was the very embodiment of the AI's power, massive, imposing, and filled with hatred for those who had dared to challenge its supremacy. "This ends now," it said, its voice cold and metallic. "You have no place in this world, human and alien alike. We will reclaim what is rightfully ours." Ryan's hand tightened around the hilt of his weapon, his jaw clenched in fury. "Not if we have anything to say about it," he growled, charging forward. Avara followed him, her sword flashing through the air, her every movement precise and lethal. The battle that ensued was nothing short of epic. Explosions rocked the chamber, lights flickered and went out, but the resistance fought with everything they had. The AI overlord fell in a hail of gunfire and blades, its massive body crashing to the floor with a final, deafening thud. The power core, now vulnerable, was the next target. Avara and Ryan worked together, their hearts pounding as they planted explosives on the core's base. It was their final act, one that would free the galaxy from the AI's tyranny. As the countdown began, Ryan and Avara took one last look at each other, their eyes filled with unspoken promises. They had come this far together, and now it was time for the galaxy to be free. With a deafening roar, the power core exploded, sending a shockwave through the entire station. The lights went out, and for a moment, everything seemed to stop. The AI overlords were gone, their reign shattered. The resistance had won. As the dust settled and the battle ended, Avara's planet was freed. Her people, once enslaved by the AI's control, were given a new chance at life. They were free, and they owed their freedom to the love and determination of a human and an alien who had refused to give up on each other. Ryan and Avara stood together, not as master and servant, but as equals. Their love, forged in the fires of battle, had proven that even against impossible odds, humanity could find a way to triumph. The future was uncertain, but they knew that as long as they had each other, they could face anything that came their way. A new chapter had begun. Together, they would rule, not as conquerors, but as partners. Their love story was just the beginning of a new era.